Hey everybody, it's Tripl-L, and here we are to speak about Wandering Witch Elaina, episodes 8 and, let me see, 9. And man, what a fun time. You know, for, as you guys know, I came into this anime because I wanted to see, after the first couple episodes, how terrible the world is. And in both episode 8 and 9, I think we continue seeing a little bit more, although these episodes are a little bit more focused in another direction. They were ultimately really cool episodes. Now, I really want to talk about episode 9 because episode 9 is the more exciting one. But episode 8 also has a point of value when it comes to talking about Elaina and how shitty Elaina is. But what I want to say overall is that both episodes 8 and 9 are episodes that victimize Elaina. And usually, or at least with the previous episodes, when Elena's the victim, it's easier to see the problems with the world and not the problems with Elaina. This time around, however, even though Elaina is the victim, these two episodes showed some negative traits to Elaina. Even episode 9, although episode 9's negative trait is a little bit more of an argument. I don't think it's like 100%. It depends on how you look at it, and I will present my arguments and what I believe here as well. But just keep that in mind. One thing I will say though is that for both episodes, I come into every episode thinking there's going to be some kind of crazy twist. The surprising thing about episode 8 is that episode 8, the one with the doll auction and all that, the surprising thing was that the twist was not all that incredible. It was just people getting their hair cut, and it was relatively straightforward. Episode 9, when we go into episode 9, you know, you see the warning saying like, hey, this is going to be pretty intense. And you go into the episode and you find out about the story about how this little girl was became a murderer. I'm just thinking, yo, this girl was out of the house the day that her parents got killed. That's pretty suspicious. The whole thing is suspicious. This little girl, she killed her uncle because he was abusive, but she turned into a hardened murderer after that. No. There's something more there, and then by the end of the episode, you find out there is something more, and you see the little girl getting executed. And even in that, there's a lot that we can actually look at. So this is going to be a really exciting video for me because I'm into it. I want to rip this apart because I think there's a lot of, I think, you know, if we're setting out to look for the terrible things of this world, I think we still see them. And these episodes, they continue ideas that we've seen before, which is actually really cool. Episode 8 continues some ideas that were presented in the episode with the town that was divided and the wine stuff. And episode 9 continues just the general ideas with Elaina. We continue that theme of witches giving up stuff to get magic power. We continue also Elena's habit of running away. So those will be very interesting to look at in depth. So let's begin. We're going to look first at episode 9. And the points that I want to, I guess the first point I want to immediately dive into is, of course, what happens to Elaina at the end. We're going to start with roughly around the spot where Elaina runs out from Estelle's place. So what's interesting here, first off, there's Elaina running off. Now, you know, when I'm watching that, the first thing I'm thinking is, okay, is Estelle dead or is Estelle alive? And the reason why I'm thinking that is because that kind of assists us in if we're making a case against Elaina. If she's alive, you know, Elaina, why did you not help her? That's my first question. I don't want to think she's alive. It's really hard to tell. One of the problems with the series is that Elaina has low acting, localized time reversal magic. And we saw it in episode 8 when Elaina repairs her hair, and we've seen it before in episode 2, I believe. Elaina has time reversal magic. I think it makes sense that Elaina would have healing magic. So this is one of those tough spots of like, well, Elaina, you know, I would have rather you had fixed Estelle because you could have. You have that power. You are a witch. But let's assume that Estelle died and there's nothing Elaina can do because that's a little bit more worthwhile and that's a little bit more fair to Elaina. In that particular case, if Estelle is dead, the conversation really becomes, could Elaina have done something better other than run away? Could she have maybe alerted someone? Could she have been a reasonable person? Which is really hard to ask for because Elena's not a reasonable person. She's a pleasure seeker. She doesn't want any kind of hardship in her life. She's the kind of person that would rather run away than encounter sad feelings. And in that sense, her running away from the dead body actually makes a lot of sense. Elaina points it out later that she's inexperienced, and it's true. Elena's 18, but she's exceedingly immature, and she doesn't handle struggle very well. She's the kind of person that would rather look away than deal with struggle. So because of that, her running away from Estelle's dead body is very consistent with her character. You know, I'm not going to look at a character who has a history of running away from the lowest emotional stimuli and say that she suddenly has to be able to think clearly for this particular situation, especially because it was a high stress situation. That said, it all really relies on whether or not you believe Estelle is alive, barely alive, or dead. Again, the safest thing is to think that Estelle is dead, and hopefully Elaina didn't go back and pick up the money. I mean, personally, I would want to take the money, but if there's a dead witch that's worked for the king before, they're probably not going to look the best. Now, when we go past that, we have the best scene in the episode with regards to Elaina, and being that Elaina is reflecting on herself. I thought this was really good, so let me just quote it. Elaina was saying, "I'm just an ordinary traveler, just an ordinary witch, inexperienced, unable to do anything." Now, what's actually really interesting here is in what direction are Elena's words going? When Elaina says that she's an ordinary witch, traveler, unable to do anything, is she saying that because she is acknowledging how powerless she is in a situation? Because that would be reasonable. Or is she saying that to justify why she's not doing more? One of the big problems with earlier Elaina is that she's not a hero, and when we actually find out about the organization that actually helps out in magical based situations, Elaina calls them an organization that meddles, already giving them a negative connotation. When we look at that, it gets a little bit more dicey there, just because of what Elena's done in the past. So if I was being 100% cynical, I'd say that when Elaina is saying that she's just an ordinary traveler, an ordinary witch, I'm thinking, okay, I think you're saying that to justify why you're not doing more in the world. You're saying that to justify why you're not being more of a help. Because the thing is, when you look at Elena's little friend that she taught, Elena's little friend is, no, I think, an ordinary witch, yet she's going out there and she's making a positive difference in the world inadvertently. The Magic Association are making positive differences in the world. And then when you look at Elaina, well, Elaina, you have a gigantic arsenal of magic. You say that you are an ordinary traveler, but you are a witch. You've aided solving a problem for our kingdom. You don't have any particular issues with breaking and entering. You seem to be quite alright attacking an auction and threatening everyone in the auction. Yeah, you might be an ordinary witch or ordinary traveler, but you have extraordinary qualities because that's what we've seen from the witches. Now, ultimately, how I feel about that final scene, I think this is her reflecting on her powerlessness. I do think there is an element of her trying to justify why she isn't able to do much. I think she's essentially creating for herself a cage that calls her an ordinary traveler so that she can justify not helping more. But I do think also she is acknowledging the weakness here, because when she did want to help, she wasn't able to that well. So I do think for that particular scene, I don't think it's like the most idealistic option. I don't think it's the most cynical option. I think there's something in the middle. Because again, Elaina, and especially in episode 9, reveals just how hedonistic she is when she's just saying like, oh yeah, I'd rather not work. I'd just rather get money. Yeah, you know, honestly, for Elaina and the witches, to sometimes the witches and Elaina, they just, I hate using the word, but they reek of entitlement. Think about how nice it must be to have the option to go back into the past, to change the past, only so that you have the knowledge that there is a potential future where things went better, to make yourself feel better. Everyone else in this world is dealing with the horrible pain of whatever this world is doing to them. And then you have Elaina and the witches who are like, I don't want to deal with negative feelings. I want to go change the past because I want to feel better about it. You know, when you strip it away, it's like, this is a little bit silly. You guys, I don't think you're using your power all that well. That said, again, what happens with Elaina here is going to be more dictated by the next episode. We have to see where her development is going to take her. I think this was a really interesting episode, and we do have to talk about Elena's mother, because Elena's mother made her promise to not think of herself in any particular way, to not think of herself better than anyone else. I would say it really depends, because Elaina thinks she's above the law sometimes, but I don't think Elena's mother is all that great either. From the first episode, Elena's mother has been pretty. I've had negative connotations for her. I mean, she's the kind of person who would set things up she would rely on her daughter eavesdropping on her so that her daughter could find out about this witch, and then she pays the witch to give Elaina a hard time, so Elaina learns about setbacks after being rejected by all the witches in town. Yeah, no, Elena's mother is pretty shitty. She's manipulative at best. And so when I look at what Elena's mother has given Elaina, I don't particularly see that as any kind of positive thing either. Elena's mother is manipulative. Yeah, there's just no other ways around it. Now, continuing on with the witches, because if we're talking about witches being entitled, we have to look at episode 9's witch here. And with episode 9's witch, what's actually really interesting is just how quickly things turn. Episode 9's witch, by the end of the episode, one thing should be clear. She's acting less for Selena and she's acting more for herself. I think that is an easy thing to say. And the reason I say that is because when you look at her final attack sequence, what is it that she is saying? I can read it for you. You were tricking me the whole time. I thought we were friends. I thought we were friends. I thought you could go back to being a good girl. This whole time you were tricking me. How interesting that this whole time she's fixated on the one note of Selena not thinking that Estelle was her friend. How interesting when earlier in the episode we get a premise that is so similar to the current situation. All that changes is the time at which the girl's descent started. So let's go back up to the premise of this episode so you could really see where exactly this witch's personality, how it ultimately twisted. Anyway, okay, so at the premise we got, like, you know, her parents were killed, she was taken in by her uncle, she was abused by her uncle, she killed her uncle. Oh no. Then we had rhetoric about it made her hate people and the wretched world that would do things to her. And then we have Estelle saying that they were really close, like real sisters. So that was really important because it tells you what Estelle thinks. Then we move on. She was saying after Selena discovered the pleasure of killing, she continued on her spree, killing people one after another. And then we find out Estelle was the one that killed her. So Estelle goes on to say, I want to prevent the robber from killing Selena's parents, that girl, back when she was still a decent human being. If I do that, I'm sure Selena's future will be saved. So what's important to note here, and this is what makes the other episode turn against Estelle, is Estelle is saying, well, here's my friend. Because of a horrible circumstance, she became a terrible person. She's not a terrible person on the inside, though, because I know that. That's what Estelle says. So I want to prevent the negative stimuli so that she never goes dark. So that's a wonderful premise at the beginning, but there's nothing different between that situation and the situation that Estelle finds herself in at the end of the episode, aside from the time frame. When you get to the end of the episode, you find out, well, this girl was not, it wasn't just, the abuse didn't start at the uncle. The abuse started at the parents. The parents were the problem. So, by the same logic that this girl launched her quest to go save Selena, I think she could have done the same logic here. Okay, so so I got this wrong. She was bad since before this. So naturally, the option there would have been, you know, let's go back to the drawing board. Let's go back to the present. Let's run away from this. We'll just come back and we'll deal with the parents. We'll nip the problem at the bud. Nothing will change because we're ultimately saying that the problem is that this girl descended into madness. But that's the big thing. When you get into the actual moment where they could have had that thought, Estelle is there, and Estelle's mentality breaks down because she overhears the reality that Selena doesn't care about her. And that's a real big clincher there. Estelle was overly emotionally attached to this idea of Selena and her friendship. And then when we go earlier in the episode, when they first get into the town, it's actually really interesting. Estelle flat out lies at the beginning of the episode. She says, I don't want to live in a world without her in it anymore. Anything else here? It'll be easy to make it so the next 10 years happen. So she's telling us all of this, and then all of a sudden when we're actually on the ride towards Selena, it's like, oh yeah, no, this is just going to exist on a completely different time axis. And it's like, what? But then your previous statements, I don't want to live in a world without her in it anymore. Okay, but you're gonna. And then she says, oh, this makes me feel better. And it's like, this is why we're doing it, just to make you sleep better at night. Really? You're just gonna, right? It gets a little bit sillier there. And it's ultimately what tells you that she is doing this more for herself. And then we have the next little scene where she had gone down and she just out of nowhere goes and hugs Selena. And it's like, come on, don't, that's one moment that tells you she was overly emotionally attached. All these things came together so that when you have that final scene of her attacking Selena, what I think should be read isn't that she's stopping her because Selena's a monster. She's stopping Selena because she's upset that her worldview was broken. She's upset that this person she thought was her friend actually didn't care about her. That's ultimately what it is. If we take that idea to be true, then that follows along with the line of thought that the witches are just maladjusted. And I mean, if you look at episode 8, like definitely one of the witches in there is maladjusted. Ultimately, I think if Estelle wasn't emotionally attached the way that we see her in the episode, I think she could have rationally said, wait, the problem started earlier. We need to retreat and fix this. All that changed is the assumption. That's all that really changed in the time frame. Now, we've talked a lot about episode 9, but episode 9 was really well constructed. That you could, it was kind of interesting to see some elements. For instance, when Estelle first saw Selena in the past, Selena, one of the things she said, she called Estelle a pervert. Very interesting choice of words. And there was another really interesting thing where Selena's father had said a really creepy line that you might have missed when Estelle's telling them that she is like the older half sister. He had said, "That's true. The nape and line of your neck are the same as Estelle's." Think about how weird it is that a man is drawing a connection to a person by looking at the nape of their neck and the line of their neck. That's pervert vision, man. That is 100% pervert vision. And that kind of gave you the indication that, oh, this guy, like that was one of the first indications this guy's a pervert, or at least has a weird focus on certain parts of the woman body. So I do think it was an excellently constructed episode. But at the end of the day, if you were to ask me my conclusions, I conclude Estelle was doing things more for herself than Selena. She had a breakdown when she found out Selena didn't care about her the way that Estelle thought, because the episode spends so much time premising that Estelle and her were such big friends. When you have a character saying like, oh, don't worry, I know on the deep down that she's actually a kind girl, it's like, oh shit, look, you just found out that reality, it's fault, right? It's that natural reaction to your reality being broken. Now, that's episode 9. We should talk about episode 8, because episode 8 is the thing that has to be acknowledged when it comes to Elaina. Now, Elena's made a victim in episode 8, but the problem with episode 8 is that when you look at this and the episode with the wine, what it tells you is that Elaina is the kind of person that only gets involved if she gets personally slighted. I mean, think about how aggressive it is to tie someone up and bring them out to a hate mob because of false advertising. Think about how aggressive that is. That is a lot of Elaina action. You would do that for them, but you would not do that. But you would not get in the way of a slave girl. You would not help out in a garden of death, right? And then you have episode 8 continuing. Elaina gets her hair cut off, and we see her the angriest she's ever been. She's doing so much. She's taking so much initiative. And then at the end of the episode, you know, she's just getting in the way of the auction. There's not one moment where she's moaning about having to do work. She's fully committed. She ends up messing up that auction, right? And it's like, that makes sense with Elena's character. Of course, she's the type of person that gets involved when she's been bothered. Of course, that's who she is. Of course, she only does something for the positive good when someone's done harm against her. That's who she is, right? You can really build the case for her. So I'm going to be very interested to see the remaining episodes. I think these episodes have been really good. Even when we're looking at the way that the world works, I'm interested. I want to see if we're going to go like on a darker spin, or if we're going to go towards the idealism now, because Elaina has had a very critical moment of reflection. And of course, you know, episode 8 showed us a very maladjusted witch. There's no point talking about her because she was just... It was actually interesting. Actually, episode 8's witch was interesting in that she took hair and gave the money to the poor. That was actually really, really interesting. And seeing Elaina be so mad about that, it was also very interesting. But yeah, It's funny because at the beginning of the series, or yeah, in my first video, I was really thinking like, how much worse is this series going to get? Is it going to get darker, or is it going to go more happy? I think it's going to get darker. I think Elaina can afford to be broken a little bit more. Well, she's been witness to a lot of pretty unfortunate events. It's going to be interesting to see where we go from here. Oh, one more thing I wanted to say is that when Elaina and Estelle were having their little pissing contest, I was so confused as to what was going on and why they were being so aggressive about it. But then I went back to episode 1 and I saw the issue. So Elaina passed the magic exams at age 14 and she was the youngest person in her country. But then you go in Estelle, and Estelle became an apprentice witch when she was 10. How interesting is that? She became an apprentice when she was 10, which tells us that she actually passed the exams before Elaina ever did. How interesting. No wonder she was a little bit bothered. No wonder it turned into a little bit of a pissing contest. But it does tell us one thing, is that people passed those exams much earlier than Elaina did. It's an interesting note. Anyway, everyone, let me know what you thought down below. Let me know if you enjoyed this episode. And until next time, I hope you have an absolutely great day.